I really quickly just wanted to demonstrate how easy it can be to create your own unique atmospheric elements for your music that sound something like this. And then in context, the first thing that I do is I try and find a sample piece of a vocal or a synth. You can really use anything. Preferably that's tonal, right? It's playing some type of note. And I want to make sure that that is either in the root note of whatever key I'm working in. So for example, this track is in the key of C minor. I found this vocal sample and I know that this is playing a C note. This is usually going to work really well with a root note because it's a super stable tone. So even though this note drags out for a really long time, it's not going to interfere harmonically with, other notes in the scale. Another really stable tone that you can use would be the fifth of the scale. So if I'm working in like the key of C minor, then that note would be G. Then I'll just take you through the processing chain. First thing is some type of distortion. I'm using Decapitator in this case on Punish, and it's doing most of the legwork. So I'll play it with and without Decapitator. Without, and then with. You don't have to use Decapitator. You can get a really similar sound with stock plugins. So I'm just going to use Ableton Saturator and Overdrive, and this is what we get. Same type of like that really distorted vibe that I was going for. After saturating the sound, I added some EQ. And the reason for that is when we're adding distortion or saturation, it's going to be adding a ton of audio content to our sample. And I'll just take these two bands off so you can see just how much audio information there is across the full frequency spectrum. Let me just turn this down. Right, like you can see we have a ton of low-end information. We have a ton of really harsh high-end information. I'll throw those back on. And that's not necessarily stuff that we want. That high-end stuff is really harsh and it's gonna mask our drums. If there's a vocal, it's probably gonna get in the way of that. And it's really just not that pleasant to listen to anyways. And then on the low-end side, we have obviously our kick, we have our bass line in this type of house music that we wanna make sure we're not causing any issues with those two things. And so cutting out the lows, cutting out the highs, that'll just tame the sound a little bit and also push it back in your mix, which is important for this type of ambience. After the EQ, there's a reverb. I use Valhalla Room in this case. You can use like the stock Ableton or stock Logic reverb. The mix is going to be fairly high. The other important thing is that the decay is fairly long too. So this one's almost at 8 seconds. And we want to make sure it's that way so that this ambience kind of like rings out for long enough in the song. After the reverb, I put on a little bit of side chaining. And this is just to have that ambience kind of pump with our track. And I specifically placed it after the reverb so that it was ducking the reverb tail. If we were to put this kickstart before the reverb happens, it wouldn't even sound like we're doing anything, right? And I'll just show you really quickly. Plugin placement in your signal chain does matter. And then lastly, a little bit more EQ just to make sure that there's going to be absolutely no issues with the low end. And that's really it. It's just saturation, EQing to make it fit and make sure it's not going to be masking the other important things going on in your track. A long reverb tail, some side chaining if you want. And then again, just a little bit more EQ cleaning it up. And just to show you that you can do this with any sound, here's a synth shot that I found, and I'll just turn off all the processing. The sample is in A, so I just pitched it up 3 semitones so that it was in C. Now I'll just add the processing that we just went over. And now we have this really cool like ambient sonar atmosphere.